Hello, my friends. Welcome to a new episode of Psicoactivo. Happy Sunday, everybody. Um, this is my fifth video in 5 consecutive days. I want to thank everybody who has commented and liked my the videos that I've done. I'm really happy that the comments are positive and encouraging, and that motivates me to keep going. So I want to thank everybody who has participated in this weird experiment that I started in 2021. Uh, it's it's gone a long way already, and it's been pretty surreal. And that ties directly into the topic that I want to talk about today. Um, we're gonna talk about downloads. What are they? Because I started. I guess the first time I started um, reading about downloads was through an author from Spain. His name is Jose Juan Benitez. Jose Juan Benitez. He wrote the famous books called The Trojan Horse, but in Spanish. This is not like John Keel's Operation Trojan Horse. It's different. Essentially, the story that Benitez talks about, he claims it to be true. He has these downloads of information that made him write these books, and allegedly he also traveled in time and traveled to the times of Jesus Christ. And the books are really wild, in my opinion. And he has a lot of following. He has millions and millions of followers that really love his books and his writing. It's something very similar to what happened to Carlos Castaneda back in the day. Uh, they formed like a large movement dedicated around their books and their um, life's work, you may say. And this is the first time that I heard about this concept of downloads. Although that time it was interpreted differently than the downloads that I'm going to talk about today, because back then, especially with people like Benitez who write about stuff with a lot of heavy religious connotations, um, these downloads are different because they don't have like this divine aspect to them. Because essentially, right now, the people that are getting the downloads are people who are generally very smart scientists. Many of them are scientists. Some of them are part of the intelligence community. Some of them are journalists. Some of them are experiencers who we got to get into experiencers, but that's going to be an entirely different episode. I just want to talk about downloads right now. And Carl Jung, who is a famous psychotherapy author who lived around the same time as Freud, but he had a very different, uh, diametrically opposed type of work compared to Sigmund Freud. Jung spoke about the collective unconscious, which essentially is described as the main uber consciousness, where all people who are creative or uh, dream, or they go to this place, which is the collective unconscious. Obviously, in this materialistic world, it's kind of impossible to know for sure whether the collective unconscious exists or not. But the phenomenon of downloads, uh, I believe, taps into this. Only the people that get these downloads, it happens differently, right? Each case has its own particulars. For example, there's a scientist like Jack Parsons, who is considered the father of rocketry. For those of you who like the occult, you would know that Parsons was part of a group led by Alistair Crowley, who was a famous occultist from the first half of the 20th century, late 19th century. And he uh, tried with all his might to get into different types of secret societies in America and other places. And he was always like a misfit. They didn't really like him per se. So Crowley, with this background, links up with Jack Parsons, who is the father of rocketry. And since then, obviously, it has to go way before that. But in the modern era, these downloads started happening to Parsons. He claims that these downloads are the reason he created rockets and this formula for rocket fuel and propulsion. And in even more modern times, there have been people from the intelligence community. Dr. Diana Pasolka talks about Tyler, who we now know, thanks to Jesse Michaels, that this Tyler is Dr. Tim Taylor, who works for Space Force and NASA. And he also studied closely the whole case of Chris Bledsoe, who is the most famous experiencer in the world. And this Dr. Tim Taylor spoke in detail to Pasolka about these downloads. And I also recently, a former CIA agent who is also a PhD talked about these downloads. His name is, let me tell you, because he has a really complicated name. His name is Sean Esbjorn-Hargens. That name sounds very Icelandic. And he talks about these downloads as well. And I talk about downloads for many reasons, though, but I want to talk specifically about Terrence Howard, who, as you know, yesterday kind of broke the internet with the Joe Rogan episode. He is getting massive downloads of information that pushed him and made him get 97 different patents, create many different science experiments that eventually became useful to people. And I was completely blown away by everything he talked about. I've spoken to other people who are experts in the field that he's talking about, and some of them don't agree with some of the stuff that he mentioned in that entire episode. I have this a good friend from Canada who goes by Holo Cypher on Twitter, who is currently studying the Maya civilization and all the studies they did of the solar system. And what he's been finding is honestly pretty amazing. And I hope I can have him someday, hopefully soon, in the podcast. But I know he's really busy with a lot of work. He's writing a lot, he's reading a lot. And the work that I've been investigating of Dr. Greenberg, the synergic theory, he linked it up to all the work he's been doing, and he's just as amazed as I am, which was really nice because there was a certain moment where I thought maybe this synergic theory has nothing to it. But no, apparently there are people who are pretty surprised with this find of Dr. Greenberg. My friend Holocipher told me right after the episode of Terrence Howard what he didn't agree with and what he did agree with. And generally, yeah, it does seem like Terrence Howard is tapped into something that is giving him a lot of information. And those are the downloads, essentially. There's this claim from many of these people who are inventing things that are pretty incredible, to be honest with you, who claim that they get these downloads of information that give them a project and they create something out of it. And they say that these downloads are from a non-human intelligence. So that's why this is important, because these people, if studied well in an anthropological manner and scientific manner as well, maybe biologically and with some brain scans as well, there might be a way to study the nature of these communications seemingly happening between these humans inventors and non-human intelligences. And I find that fascinating. Something similar to that started happening to me when I had a near-death experience at the end of 2014. Something happened. I processed the information a little differently. And it's weird. I can do several things at once, pay attention to several things at once, which I couldn't definitely not do before the near death experience that I had. And that also came with some uh, struggling because I also get a lot of panic attacks. It gets really bad. And there are some times where I can't really sleep because there's a lot of information in the head and I have to sit down and write everything. And yeah, it is strange. I don't know if this is going to lead me to create something, but it definitely is pretty interesting information that I don't know exactly where it came from. The investigation about Dr. Greenberg has a little bit to do with that. Uh, so yeah, the the downloads are certainly interesting, and it's pretty easy to recognize when something is coming to your head, and you're pretty sure, if not 100% sure, that you didn't come up with that. It's weird. So yeah, I'm gonna leave you with a final video of this doctor, Sean Esbjorn-Hargens, who I'm reaching out to right now. I have sent him an email. I got his email and I sent him an email, and I hope he can respond soon so we can talk about this at length because I find it fascinating. The interview he did with Danny Jones on Danny Jones's podcast, that's where he explains how these downloads work. And I think it's worth a watch. So here it is, Dr. Sean Esbjorn-Hargens. Here it is.
There's a personality system called the Enneagram that Gurdjieff, a Russian mystic in the early 1900s, kind of made popular, and then it came over to the U.S. in the 80s, and businesses use it today to understand 9 different personality types of individuals. And I've taught that system in graduate courses for many years. And it's a very amazing system that kind of looks at 9 different major types of personalities and kind of what their main fears are and what their core orientation or strategy to dealing with challenges in their life are. So I had a background in this system, and the download was essentially this experience. I was flying home on a plane from Brazil. I was doing some consulting work there. And I just started kind of having like all this information in my head around the system and the fact that this system is actually, well, at first I didn't know where it was headed, but I got this impulse to start playing with the different triangle combinations in the system because it's a 9 point kind of chart, and so there's different triangles you can make between the different numbers, like the 7, the 9, and the 2, and there's different harmonics connected to those combinations. So I ended up having this intense impulse to start mapping this out. So I started making these little triangles with the different numbers, and I created, there's like 27 possible combinations, right? Because you have 9 times, and then I started taping them together, and I started like trying to figure out, and it was all this deep impulse. And my family was joking about, right? What's the guy's name on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where he's making the Devil's Tower out of mashed potatoes? It's just kind of this like intense. Like I'm staying up. I'd do my work during the day. The family would go to sleep, and then I would start building these geometric models, right? Up until about midnight, and it turned out they created these complex platonic forms, right? Like octahedrons, essentially, kind of this mega octahedron. But anyway, so in this like 3-month process, I was also just getting information that seemed connected to galactic sources, that seemed connected to potentially archangels, so like it was really kind of odd and confusing.
Is this something that you had thought about before? Or?
No, it's like that was the whole thing about it being a download was like I knew nothing about sacred geometry. I knew nothing about all these things that were kind of coming through. And there was this impulse, and it was like I was working on it. And then at a certain point late at night when I got to a place where I knew I was close, I knew I was really close to kind of where this was headed. And I finally made this model, and I have pictures of them. I can pull them up probably. And then once that model was there on the table, when I finished it and I stood back, all of a sudden I was like, I just had this thing released in me. It was like, okay, that's it. I did it. And it was like this knowing that that's what all this was about, was to create that particular geometric structure. And it was like almost like I was released from this obsessive compulsive desire to try and create it. So it was like it was in me, and my job was to like get it out. And I was pretty confused by this whole situation. And so I talked with a number of psychics to ask them kind of, what do you think's going on? Can you give me like any insight?
Psychics.
Yeah. So like people, seers, people with kind of intuitive knowledge, just, I was like, hey, help me out. Like what's this about? What's going on? And, they all confirmed in their own way that like, yeah, like this is like what we'd call a download. Like you were given some information, and then your job is in a sense to kind of like bring it out. And so I've been working on a whole book related to that geometric object.
Did this stuff come to you at a specific time of day? Did you have to follow any sort of like creative process to sort of get this stuff to come to you, or was it just coming to you randomly?
It seemed to start on that plane trip home for whatever reason, and it just kept occurring. Like there was it was like this impulse where I didn't have like a vision, like a geometric vision of something I was trying to work towards. It was more like this info, and it was like I would get a little clue, like, okay, make triangles. Okay, I make a bunch of triangles with all the numbers. Okay, now try and connect them. Like, is there a pattern that connects them? Okay, so it's like I was getting these like intuitive hits on kind of step by step what to do, and maybe that was just a creative process, totally within my own kind of psyche. It didn't feel like that. It felt like something else was going on. And people I talked to who seemed trustworthy and insightful about these things confirmed, from their perspective that, yeah, there was likely an interaction happening between me and, other sources of information or non-human intelligences, right? And I think that's what makes this whole domain so kind of sketchy and confusing, because it's not linear, it's not clear, it's not like, oh, boom, here it is. I mean, in Chris's situation, it's sometimes more clear than it is for a lot of us other folks, where it's like we're kind of grabbing straws in the dark and trying to make sense of this.
It's like a minefield trying to navigate this topic, because there's so many grifters that are involved in it. And especially when you start talking about psychics, I mean, there's so many psychics that are so full of shit. It's unbelievable. Right. So yeah, it's really hard to navigate like what's real and what's not. But I mean, what you're describing sounds a lot like Rosicrucianism,
right?
Which has been a topic that has come up on this podcast a lot recently. Which Diana Pasulka talks about in her book, where some of these Space Force rocket engineers practice these protocols where they like don't drink caffeine, and they go out in the sunlight and they try to like tap into some sort of extra perception or some sort of intelligence that is not perceivable normally.
Yeah, well, the esoteric traditions are full of those protocols.
Yeah.
Right. And there are people, like Tyler D and others, and, and Jacques Vallée's connected to, Rosicrucianism, as was Hynek, so they both have links into that particular tradition. A lot of people kind of discover or develop their own protocols kind of intuitively, but there are lots of traditions that basically train you to make contact, right? And so like Grant Cameron has a book on contact modalities, but these kind of contact modalities, I think, are kind of go even deeper, because they're really about these rituals, these daily and weekly rituals you go through And they can be simple, just like getting up at the same time a certain way, journaling. Like they don't have to be weird and esoteric, but there's like a process that you put your awareness in your body. Usually your body's involved, right? Like not having caffeine or running every day.
It's like the body is some sort of, you can treat your body as an antenna.
Yeah. And so these traditions have these protocols. And from my understanding and kind of my working hypothesis is these protocols activate different subtle bodies. We have multiple subtle bodies, and we have different types of inner senses connected to different subtle bodies. And so different protocols activate different bodies and senses, and then based on that, you'll have access or contact to certain types of energies and or intelligences.
What do you think? It's pretty fascinating, right? So, I guess that's the video for today. I want to thank everybody who's been supporting the channel in these crazy days over the last week. And I want to encourage you guys to please like, share, and subscribe if you like what I do. That really helps the channel grow. And I'll see you guys hopefully tomorrow, if not Tuesday for sure. Bye-bye.